Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Spiritual Survival Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Brown. Our team's mission is to help you have eyes to see the times we are living in. Take unprecedented measures to prepare yourself spiritually for the events that will precede the second coming of Jesus Christ. If the mission of our podcast resonates with you, please click subscribe, like, and share this content. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Spiritual Survival. I'm your host, Randy Brown. Thrilled to have you with us again this week. We have a real treat for everybody listening in today. I'm very excited to have Dave Butler with us today. Most of you may be familiar with Dave. He's been on a number of podcasts. And I had a topic very near and dear to my heart that I wanted to discuss, and it worked out perfectly that he actually reached out to me this week. And we're gonna talk today a little bit about the book of Ether and the brother of Jared and all of the temple imagery. Dave, welcome to Spiritual Survival.
Randy, thanks for having me.
You bet. Let me introduce Dave a little bit for those of you who may not know him. When I first heard him introduce himself, I was very, very impressed because he says, I have no keys, I have no special degrees, I'm nobody special. I'm just a dude in a ward. If I remember that was the verbiage he used, just a dude in a ward. But as I've heard him talk the last few times, I've been so impressed by his understanding of temple imagery, and particularly in the Book of Mormon, which is something that I've really awakened to myself. And I think this is so critical to see this in the time we live. And what I'm going to ask him to share today, I think, can really deepen our understanding of the endowment and see that the Book of Mormon really is a pattern for how to attain the fullness of the gospel. It's a book about men and probably women that have attained the fullness of the gospel, and which is literally entering the presence of our Savior Jesus Christ. So, Dave, I know you've been a lawyer and you're also a science fiction novelist, about to publish your 19th novel, if I understand that correctly.
That's it.
So welcome. Yeah, let's jump right into the book of Ether and how it's a pattern for the endowment and the fullness of the gospel.
I did write about Ether, first chapters of Ether, in my 2012 book, The Goodness and the Mysteries, but that was a long time ago, and I didn't touch on it in the more recent book. So I went and reread those sort of first 5 chapters of Ether this morning. So I want to sort of frame this as, look, here are observations I want to make. And it may not add up to a systematic whole, but the overall headline is I would say this. Well, let's say this. So Ether 1, if you look at Ether 1, in fact, the very first 2 verses. All right, I, Moroni, proceed to give an account. And then verse 2 says, I take mine account from the 20 and 4 plates, which were found by the people of Limhi, which is called the Book of Ether. Right. This is the beginning. And so this is, I think, worth remembering that, or worth thinking about this for a minute. So notwithstanding that the text right in front of us here calls this the Book of Ether, actually for Moroni, the Book of Ether was a bigger work. Okay. 24 gold plates. And I don't think we have any reason to know what the dimensions of the 24 gold plates are, right? But potentially it could hold a lot of information. What Moroni is giving us is what he calls his account. Okay, I take mine account from the Book of Ether. So this is we call it the Book of Ether. Ether did not write this. Moroni created this. We're reminded of this from time to time, where Ether 12, for example, Moroni breaks in for an extended discussion, right? And it's really Moroni giving an extended essay on faith, hope, and charity. We get short, and Ether 5 is similarly, right? Moroni breaks in and makes comments, and we get them within chapters. So, but I think that's worth thinking about. There's an account, there's an historical account out there, and now Moroni wants to take material out of that historical account and create what he calls his account. I take mine account from the larger history. Now, why do I think that's interesting? There's well, here's kind of a high level characterization, Randy. Okay. In fact, I'm gonna. This is not a pet peeve, but here's like a thing I think about from time to time. All right. When we teach ourselves to say about the Book of Mormon, I know the Book of Mormon is true, or I believe the Book of Mormon is true, I think we potentially create kind of a pitfall for people. Okay. Why is that? Well, because if we say just, I know the Book of Mormon is true, we're actually collapsing different kinds of ideas about different ways in which it might be true all into one. And there are some ways in which I do know the Book of Mormon is true. I have confidence in the Book of Mormon is true. I believe it. I have faith, right? For example, so I wish that as a culture, I wish that our practice was to be more specific and to say what we really mean. Okay. So what do I really like? In what sense can I say the Book of Mormon is true? Do I believe it is an ancient document? Yes, I do. Do I believe that there were Nephites and Jaredites somewhere in the Western Hemisphere? Yes, I do. Okay. Do I believe that their Lehi and his family actually exited Jerusalem probably in 600 BC? Yeah, I think that is the thing that happened. Okay. Do I think that Joseph translated the book, basically in the way in which he described? We can debate the details, right? But basically, yes, I do. I think that too, right? So in all of those ways, I have no problem saying the Book of Mormon is true, right? In all of those senses. And by the way, I love the Book of Mormon. We were saying, Randy, before we started here, one of the characterizations I made of myself is I'm a Book of Mormon guy. Okay. I've read the Bible in Hebrew and Greek. I am a Book of Mormon guy. So what am I complaining about? Well, for example, this, okay. The idea, I know the Book of Mormon is true, might lead someone to look at the Book of Ether and say, these things happened exactly as they are written on the page. This is an account that is intended principally to be historical and to tell us about these events. I don't think there's any reason to think that. In other words, I think the first thing we know about this is that Moroni made the book. He had raw material, but Moroni made the book. Okay. And Moroni is a writer. And Moroni is a temple man. We know this because his book ends on the temple judgment scene. And I will meet you at the bar of Christ, having ascended to the throne of God, and where I believe I will be vindicated. I will meet you there as a witness, right? That's how Moroni ends. He is a temple writer, and he is very worried about us. We know this because in the first ending to his book, which is in chapter 8 of Mormon, right, he destroys us. He calls us cankers and hypocrites. Okay, and asks, why do we pollute the holy church of God? So I don't think it's especially interesting for Moroni to give us a history, right? I don't think the history is the interesting thing. I think we ought to look at what Moroni has done in the book of Ether in the context of a prophet who is warning us, who is condemning us, who is himself a visionary prophet, meaning someone who ascends into the presence of God, and that's the source of his prophecies. Okay. Now, so with that as a background, like what do we see? Well, I want to point out a few things in the sort of early chapters of Ether where I think deliberately Moroni is echoing Nephi. I think he has the plates of Jared, the plates of Ether in front of him, the record of the people of Jared, and he's choosing, right? He is deliberately choosing what to include. And I think he is deliberately echoing things that maybe he wants us to see, right? In especially first, but maybe first and second Nephi both. And then giving us absolutely a solid shot of temple doctrine that is best understood with reference to the Nephite temple worship, the temple doctrines that we see elucidated in Nephi and Alma and in Helaman. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through. I'm going to point out some things that I saw sitting at the Denny's this morning, rereading Ether 1 to 5. Okay. And to some extent, Randy, what I'm going to have to do is sort of, we'll just see how long this takes and how complicated, how complex it gets, right? But I will try to make connections to other parts of the Book of Mormon or other parts of Scripture to show you that there is temple imagery being shown to us on the way towards an encounter where Ether, the book of Ether, really Moroni editing an account of the deeds of the brother of Jared, really shows us the whole core of the temple experience. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it actually goes. So, all right. I think it's very interesting that, and I think it's not an accident that, and that, by the way, I think is a good sort of rule of construction. I think when you're reading the Book of Mormon, you should assume that whatever is in the text is not an accident. It's the writer said of themselves that they might make mistakes, right? But it also seems to be the case that they went to a great deal of trouble, to a great deal of risk to record these things. And so we ought to assume that they're not throwing out spontaneous, surplus, useless words, right? So I think it's very interesting that in verse 3, we're told that the record speaks concerning the creation of the world and of Adam, right? Now, at a high level, Randy, one of the things I like to think about so I sort of two responses to this. At a high level, one of the things I like to think about with respect to the Book of Mormon is what are the things that the Book of Mormon is really, really interested in? And in particular, what is it interested in more than other books of Scripture? And it turns out one of the things the Book of Mormon is really interested in is the garden story. Now, the garden story in the Old Testament occurs explicitly in Genesis 1, and then there's a chapter in Ezekiel, and I always forget the chapter number in Ezekiel. I always want to say it's 16, and it's not, it's 20-something, and whatever, doesn't matter. There's basically two places where the story is told in any kind of detail. But we get Adam and Eve over and over and over again in the Book of Mormon. Okay, so and the context. Well, so I'm gonna let me jump to other passages. So in the encounter in Ammonihah between Alma and Amulek, there's a passage where Alma comments to the reader that when you learn that as you're more and more righteous, you're taught more of the mysteries of God. But as if you are wicked, you forget the mysteries of God. I think this might be Alma 12, or maybe it's Alma 13. And then a couple of verses later, Antiona shows up. And Antiona is one of the leaders of the Ammonites. And what Alma and Amulek are trying to teach involves the resurrection. And Antiona says, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, your story makes no sense. Your own mystery story, your own myth that you tell says that Adam and Eve get cast out of the garden and a cherub with a flaming sword is placed there, and so they can't get back. So in the story you yourself tell, resurrection is impossible. Okay. And it was two things here. One, Antiona is illustrating the point that Alma has just made. Okay. Which is that, in other words, he and the rest of the Ammonites once knew the mysteries of God, but because of their sin, they have forgotten them. Now, Antiona still remembers enough of the mysteries to remember what at least sort of an outline, a skeletal, factual summary of what happened in them. Okay. But his wickedness has caused him to forget what they really meant. Okay. By the way, mysteries is an important word. Mysteries means a long form ordinance in the form of a drama in which participants gain immortality and spiritual powers. Immortality and exaltation would be sort of a maybe Mormon language to talk about it. Okay. So thing one, Antiona is illustrating Alma's point. Alma makes the point, and then he tells about Antiona. Thing two, what Antiona tells us indirectly is what the story of Alma and Amulek's mystery is. Okay, every mystery, a mystery religion has a story, a drama that people are enacting. So, for example, the famous mysteries of Eleusis, the story is probably the story of the kidnapping of Persephone and how Demeter goes to rescue her and how Persephone has to end up alternating her time in the underworld or upon earth. That's probably the story. People in the mystery, in the religion, participated in that story, okay, as a play to learn secret doctrines and to gain spiritual power and immortality, right? So Antiona here tells us inadvertently what the story is of the Nephite mystery. And the story is the expulsion from Eden and the return. That's the story of the Nephite mystery. Because Antiona remembers we got cast out of Eden, but you couldn't come back because there's an angel with a flaming sword there to stop you. Okay, so this is a long excursus to say. In fact, I'm not done. I'm going to excurse some more. Why is the Book of Mormon interested in Adam and Eve and other things that are really associated with that story, like the tree of life, like the seraphim? Okay, these are all Eden components. The reason is that the story of the Nephite sacred drama is Adam and Eve expelled from Eden, returning to Eden. Okay. That seems to be, in other words, the thing that those people sacredly reenacted in order to win their eternal life and also spiritual power. Okay. So, by the way, if you go look at the story of when, this is in like Alma 17, 18, and Alma 20 or so, something in there. King of Limhi, wait, I lie. King Lamoni. I confuse Limhi and Lamoni. King Lamoni and then Lamoni's father. So when Ammon is going to preach King Lamoni, there is a short list of things that Ammon is said to teach him, right? So remember, Ammon wins his attention by defending his flocks at the waters of Sebus, driving off all the robbers, right? And then goes back to the stables to take care of the horses. And so Lamoni summons him out, indicates his willingness to be taught. And when it gets down to describe what does Ammon teach Lamoni, it's a short series of things that start with the creation, including the creation of Adam, the fall, the necessity of Christ. Then Lamoni passes out and he wakes up having seen a vision of Christ. Okay. Exactly the same sequence happens with Aaron and Lamoni's father, the king. There's no waters of Sebus, but when Ammon's behavior and Lamoni's behavior basically wins Aaron a way in, and it gets to discussion again in like chapter 20 or so. What does Aaron teach? It's the same thing. It's the creation, including the creation of Adam, and then the fall, and then Christ and the plan of redemption, and then the king passes out, right? And then he wakes up, and it seems like I think it doesn't expressly say he saw Christ, but he starts immediately telling everyone we're going to worship Christ from now on, right? So so it is striking that two things. One, Ether 1:3, how does what is contained on the plates? Well, the creation of the world and also of Adam, right? Now, I don't think that's wasted language. I don't think we need to say, and also of Adam, like why do we need to know that? Why not just start with the tower? Well, I think the answer is that Moroni is framing for us that we are going to get temple content really throughout the book, but maybe particularly in the next few chapters. And there's a series of verses. Well, we'll get to Ether 3 in a minute, but let me say for right now that Ether 3 makes clear that what is happening in the brother of Jared's seeing God, he enters into the presence of God at the top of a mountain. The top of a mountain is typologically the same thing as heaven or the temple. That is a temple scene. He enters into the presence of God. And why does he do it? He has to do it to be redeemed from the fall, right? I mean, you can look at it right now. It's Ether 3:13, right? You redeemed from the fall, being brought back into my presence, right? Now again, we don't need to think that the brother of Jared is writing down exactly this. He wrote something, okay, and then it's Moroni. It's through Moroni, the Nephite prophet, who is a temple man and who knows the Nephite temple story, which is the expulsion. In other words, the idea, the great Nephite teaching, is that we have been expelled from Eden. Here we are in this life, in the middle of the great journey that is taught in the temple. The journey started before you got here. You are no longer in the first room. You made covenant promises before you came. You personally experienced the fall. Here you are. You have some things you have to learn in this life. Why? Ether 3:13, to be brought back into the presence of God, to be redeemed from the fall. Ether 14, in Christ shall all mankind have life, shall they become his sons and daughters. This is one of the promises of the Sermon on the Mount, one of the 7 promised blessings in Matthew chapter 5. They shall be called the children of God, right? And then you approach the veil in Matthew 7, asking for a gift, asking to be treated as a child, as a son or daughter of God. And this is the promise. Entry into his presence is becoming one of his sons and daughters. It's having eternal life. It's being redeemed from the fall. So this is in other words, By the way, there's a verse in here somewhere where, uh, yeah, so Ether 4:4 is interesting because it says, behold, I have written, so after the temple encounter. And I know this is sort of high level, and then I want to kind of go through and look at some individual verses, okay? But I want to set out the high level point here. Ether 4:4, Moroni says, I have written upon these plates the very things which the brother of Jared saw. Now that's interesting, right? I think we need to read that in connection with what we read in chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. Moroni is creating this account, and out of the account of the 24 plates of ether. And he's saying here, I wrote the very things which the brother of Jared saw. Now, by the way, does that leave room for Moroni to have crafted some of this account? Yeah, well, he just says he wrote what Jared saw. He doesn't say, I wrote the words which the Lord spoke to Jared, or the brother of Jared. And he doesn't say, that brother of Jared taught these doctrines this way, right? The implication might be, I took the brother of Jared's vision. The way I understand it in my temple paradigm is that the brother of Jared was being admitted into the presence of the Lord and redeemed from the fall. And so I worked that in sort of the craft, using my craft, my poetic skill. I have worked that into a vision because I want to help you, people who in Mormon 8 I express great concern for, because you pollute the holy church of God, right? So this is, although this is describing what the brother of Jared did, saw, encountered, we're getting it through a Moroni filter, and we don't know how much. And maybe the answer is there's a lot of Moroni filter. And if that's the case, that's fine, because this is Moroni showing us entry into the presence of God, right? And like, how much do I really care that in 3200 BC on a Wednesday, a guy probably named Mahonri Moriankamer actually went onto a mountain on the shore of the Sea of Okhotsk and did, like, that does not actually matter to me. What actually matters to me is the path by which I can do the same thing, right? So Randy, that's kind of the high level. Before I get into sort of pointing out details that I think are interesting, do you have any kind of a reaction? What do you think? Criticism, questions, objections? I can take it.
No, I might just add to that. My paradigm through the lens that I see it, um, that Mormon has just given us an account of the downfall of the Nephite people.
Yeah.
And just like we were told in conference by Elder Bednar, that this book is not a history. This book is about our future, and that Mormon and Moroni were visionaries. They saw our day. They saw the things that will come upon this nation. And so Mormon gives his account, and then Moroni here adds to it by throwing in the account of the Jaredites. And these two stories of destruction of people because of secret combinations, um, and it seems to me that he's throwing in this story of the brother of Jared because the thing that can save us as we experience something very similar happening in our day is the endowment and the temple. That if we have these experiences in the temple, this experience with Christ, where we come into His presence, um, we can ascend and be protected to a large extent during very, very similar things happening.
Yeah.
That's my lens.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Um, all right, let's get into some of the detail. I sort of the high level, a chapter heading to discussion of detail. I think that Moroni has Ether's plates, and I think my sense is he feels based on kind of what we're going to read here. I think he feels obligated not to just invent things. So I think he's pulling things that are really on the plates to make this account. They don't add up to a systematic presentation of what we might want to see a systematic presentation, and that's not what it is. But a number of details he gives us are are sort of hints that what we're looking at is a temple narrative, and that it's going to come into a temple climax. Okay. I think if he were making up the details, it could be more systematic. Instead, he's picking details out of an existing account. So let me start with this idea of the Great Tower. Okay. What is the Great Tower? So it does not say here what the Great Tower is for. But in Genesis, the Great Tower, what is it, Genesis 11, they're building a tower so they can get to heaven. Right. Now it's very interesting to think about that image. Because what is a tower that you can use to get to heaven? It is in fact a temple. And the temple appears in Isaiah 5, for example, again in Matthew, in other books, in some of the Psalms. The temple is referred to as a migdal, as a tower. The temple is a tower. It is a tower where you can get to heaven, the kingdom of heaven, the place where God's throne is in the Holy of Holies. So that's interesting. So what's wrong with the people of Babel building a tower that by means of which they can get to heaven? Well, we don't have a very full account, but the answer must be that there's something wrong with this temple, right? They don't have the authority to do it. They are worshiping the wrong God, right? There is a problem with this temple of some sort.
It's like they're trying to ascend to a higher dimension um, by the arm of flesh, as opposed to relying upon Jehovah.
I think that's right. And I think, there are repeated images of sort of having to be authorized, having to be admitted to get in, right? In like the apocalyptic works, you get the idea of we have to pass by the guardian angels, I have to know passwords to get past. This seems to be an idea that says no, by our industry, by brute force, by working hard, by having a large slave population, we're just gonna force our way there, right? We'll build our own temple, right? All of that's a little bit sort of inferential, right? But this is a temple, and there's something wrong with it. Now that's interesting because this sets up some parallels with First Nephi. Okay, and we're going to see more parallels with First Nephi. Lehi flees a corrupted temple order. He himself tells us that in his vision. So in his vision, First Nephi 8, and again, this could be like a whole 2-hour conversation, and we're not going to have it, right? So I'm going to like pithily summarize a large discussion. But First Nephi 8 is an ascension through 3-part space. The Temple of Solomon, as described in Kings and Chronicles, is a 3-part space by which you ascend. The third space is the kingdom of God. It is where God rests. It is where the throne of God is. It is where the rock, the foundation stone, is located. Okay. The center part of that ascent in First Nephi 8 shows mists of darkness. Now, this seems to correspond, and we'll talk about this in the ascent to through the temple. There is an incense altar in the middle, in the second space. Okay, so right where in the physical architecture we have an incense altar, in Lehi's dream we have mists of darkness. Now this is a negative valorization, right? This says there's something wrong with this temple. because whatever's happening here in the middle part is leading people astray. It causes them to fall off the straight and narrow path, fall into the filthy river, which is hell, and drown. By the way, the name of that middle part is the Haykal, which means great and spacious building. Okay, any palace or temple is called a Haykal. The whole temple is sometimes called a Haykal. The middle room is called a Haykal. And by the way, we see a great and spacious building there, and there are people with very fine clothing on it. The clothing in the book of Exodus designed for Aaron and his sons, the priestly class, to wear in the temple, is fine and very fine clothing. So Lehi's dream, and again, if you're hearing me say this for the first time, I have elsewhere talked about this at great length. Get into YouTube and just look for me. You'll find me talking about this stuff. I am summarizing a much bigger discussion. But in Lehi's dream, what he's showing us is that the temple in his day is corrupted. That the temple journey is still true and available, because the journey still can get you to, right? If you listen to a right guide, he's calling out his family, and those who listen to him can still make it into the presence of the tree of life, up the straight and narrow path, right? Grasping 4 times, grasping the iron rod before entering in the presence of the tree of life. So the path is still there, but it's made harder because the people who are in the Haykal, the big middle part, the priestly class, they are obscuring the way with their false mists of darkness, with their fancy clothing, with their jeering at the poor. By the way, at the end, I want to say, First Nephi 8, maybe 31 and 32 or something. Really, Nephi, in writing this down, refers to the paths people fall into, and also the great and spacious building as strange. Strange in King James English does not mean weird. It means foreign. There's 2 different Hebrew words it could represent. They both mean foreign. So Lehi seems to be saying a foreign ideology has corrupted the religion of the temple and obscured the path for many. Okay. In any case, the true temple order in Jerusalem has fallen, and Lehi therefore flees and takes with him what he believes to be the true temple order. So I think when Moroni is choosing details like, hey, creation and Adam, he's saying, here comes a temple discussion. And who are these people? They are fleeing from, now, Ether or Jared, or the brother of Jared, if we could get those guys on the phone, they might not have had this understanding. But Moroni's understanding is they are fleeing from a false temple order, just like my people did. My people fled the mists of darkness of Jerusalem. These people are fleeing the Tower of Babel. So verse 34, chapter 1, verse 34, we get 2 descriptions of the brother of Jared. And it's really interesting because they both parallel descriptions made of Nephi. And in fact, the descriptions, in these particular descriptions of Nephi, are both relevant to his being a temple man. So verse 34, the brother of Jared, being a large and mighty man, and a man highly favored of the Lord. Okay. So first of all, highly favored of the Lord. That's in First Nephi 1:1. Nephi says he was favored of the Lord all his days. Therefore, he knew the goodness and the mysteries of God. Because I was favored, I knew the mysteries. Right? First Nephi 1:1. I am a temple man. I knew the mysteries. I was favored of the Lord. Secondly, he says, I am a large and mighty man. Now, Nephi doesn't quite use that language about himself. He says he's large of stature. And he says he's large of stature in 2 places. And the first, so we'll take them backwards, actually. The second is when is when he meets Zoram. Okay. He's Commando Nephi, gone over the wall, kills Laban, gets the record. He's dressed as Laban to try and, get out safely. And he runs into Zoram. Zoram believes that he is Laban, right? Which, by the way, may mean they had a family resemblance. So, it's only when they get to where the brothers are hiding that Zoram goes, wait a minute, something is up. And Nephi grabs him. And this is near the end of First Nephi 4. And it says, I was large of stature, so Zoram couldn't get away. And I swore an oath to him, hey, come join us. There's a place for you. And he relaxed. Okay. So Nephi tells us he's large of stature because it's relevant to the story, right? It's relevant to why could I pin this other guy, even with presumably Nephi's holding the plates, right? Like the plates are in here somewhere, which must be pretty heavy. Nevertheless, right? He grabs Zoram, pins him. The other place where Nephi says he's large of stature is in Second Nephi. I lie. First Nephi chapter 2, verse 16. And it says, I, Nephi, being exceedingly young, nevertheless being large in stature, and having great desires to know the mysteries of God. Okay, the mysteries of God are the ordinance of the circular journey of being expelled from Eden and returning to Eden. That's the mysteries of God that the Nephites knew. So this is when they get thrown out. They've left Jerusalem. They're out there camped in Dad's tent. In verse 16 says, I was young, but I was big, and I had great desire to know the mysteries of God. Therefore I cried unto the Lord, and he did visit me. By the way, what that tells us about the mysteries of God that Nephi knows is that they have to do with meeting the Lord. Right? This appears to be the moment when Nephi knows the mysteries for the first time. And what it is the Lord visits him. So the mysteries have to do with entering into the presence of God. So we get this now this is the interesting question. And again, I'm going to sort of summarize a little bit what I have said in more detail elsewhere. Or if you are a reader and have $30, you can go read In the Language of Adam and mark it up to your heart's content. But you can also find me saying this stuff on YouTube and many channels, okay, for free, for $0. So why does Nephi say in 1 Nephi 2:16 that he's large of stature? Well, there's reason, I think, to believe that the ordinance of the Nephite mystery, the mysteries of God the Nephites knew, is to be found in the Sermon on the Mount, which is to say that the surprising key that unlocks the Book of Mormon is in the New Testament. It's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And again, this is a 3-hour conversation. We're not going to have it. But there are ritual gestures in there, like taking off your clothing and then like putting new clothing on later, like having a feast, okay? Like learning secret gestures with both your hands. Like, and I think this is in maybe chapter 5, verse 38, give or take a verse, okay? Being smitten on the cheek, right? Matthew 5, if someone smites you on the cheek, turn the other cheek, right? Now, there's a moral dimension to that, but if you read Matthew 5, 6, and 7 as an ordinance, there are a series of actions, and that implies that one of the actions in the ordinance might have been that at a certain point you were smitten on the cheek. Now, by the way, it's really interesting because Hugh Nibley in the Message of the Joseph Smith Papyri, which, by the way, I think is actually, I think it's a work of staggering genius. I think what Nibley did that we have not appreciated is he wrote a temple commentary on the Book of Mormon. And the whole thing is disguised as a commentary on a piece of Egyptian literature none of us has any reason to care anything about. I think that is really a commentary in the Book of Mormon. Okay. So in the message of the Joseph Smith Papyri, Nibley talks about in Egyptian ritual being smitten 7 times as being how mortality is put into the initiate. In other words, you personally experience the fall in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 or so, when you are smitten on the cheek. Calls it the 7 blows of death. Okay. By the way, in that encounter between Alma and Amulek and the wicked of Ammonihah who used to know the mysteries, the wicked of Alma and of Ammonihah who used to know the mysteries smite Alma and Amulek on the cheek 7 times. You can go read it. It's in, I think, chapter 14. 7 times they're smitten on the cheek. And the last time it's so bad, it doesn't say they fell down, but after the 7th time, it says Alma and Amulek stood back up again. Okay. In other words, what we're shown is a smiting. People who used to know the rituals are smiting you on the cheek 7 times until they're knocked to the ground. Now, Helaman 4, though, in this, I know we're like another excursus here, Randy. You did not expect like the runaway train when you agreed to have me on, but I'm like a force of nature. So so Helaman 4:12. This is an example. Man, I read this verse for like 50 years. Okay, looking at this verse, thinking nothing of it, reading along, nodding my head, never thinking anything. Helaman 4, verse 12, is talking about the misbehavior. This is like during the days of Nephi, son of Nephi, son of Helaman, son of Helaman. This is Nephi the detective, okay, is during his ministry. And the problem here, yes, there are dissenters, and yes, there are Lamanites who are hostile to us, but the real problem is internally. We have people who are wicked, and their wickedness gives power to the outsiders who want to destroy us. That's the basic thing going on. In verse 12, it's talking about these wicked among us. It was because of the pride of their hearts, because of their exceeding riches, yea, it was because of their oppression to the poor, withholding their food from the hungry, withholding their clothing from the naked, smiting their humble brethren upon the cheek, making a mock of that which was sacred.
Hmm.
And then we get other sins, denying the spirit of prophecy and of revelation, murder, plunder, lie, stealing, etc. Smiting their humble brethren upon the cheek, making a mock of that which was sacred. Early this year, I think for the first time, I read that and said, wow, this actually is basically openly saying that the smiting upon the cheek was in some context to the Nephites a sacred gesture, which tends to corroborate that the Sermon on the Mount is the outline of the ordinance that they knew, and that maybe being smitten upon the cheek was the symbolic gesture in the first room of the temple journey where you are experiencing the fall. You're being stripped down into your garment of flesh, smitten on the cheek so that mortality comes upon you and cast out into the terrestrial world. Okay. Now, why does that matter? We're gonna, I'm like Donald Trump. I'm gonna weave. We're gonna go back where we started. You don't have to like Trump or dislike him. To either way, you can enjoy that comment. So 1 Nephi 2:16, okay? Again, we already read this. I, Nephi, being exceedingly young, nevertheless, being large in stature, and having great desires to know of the mysteries of God, therefore I had the mysteries experience, okay? Why is he telling us he's big? Why does that matter? Because what Nephi is saying is, look, the temple journey that Nephi knows is physically demanding. It's not a nice thing you do in 50 minutes on a Wednesday on a long lunch hour. Okay. It's something that exhausts you. It's something that involves getting smitten on the cheek, possibly so violently that you get knocked down, to teach you a lesson, to remind you that you will never forget that you You are here and you're experiencing mortality. His point was, I was young. Normally, you don't let kids do this thing, but I was big. I was large in stature, therefore I could take it and had the experience. So what does Nephi say? I'm favored because I had the experience. I was large. I was tough. I could take it. Therefore, I was able to have the experience. How does he describe the experience in the second half of that verse? I did cry unto the Lord. Okay, so somehow crying unto the Lord is part of, maybe it's part of the trigger, maybe it's a repeated part of the experience of entering into the mysteries of God. Now, all of this, I know, Randy, you're like, Dave, I wanted to talk about ether, but this brings us back to ether. Okay, this brings us back to ether. So verse 34, chapter 1, verse 34, the brother of Jared being a large and mighty man and highly favored of the Lord. Not only do these two things parallel Nephi, but they parallel Nephi specifically with respect to him being a person who knows the mysteries. In 1 Nephi 1:1, he's highly favored. In 1 Nephi 2:16, he's large of stature. In both of those verses, those connect to him knowing the mysteries. All right. Now, again, I think that on the plates of ether, Moroni found information that the brother of Jared was large and he's about to read a mysteries experience of the brother of Jared. So I don't think he's making these things up. I think Moroni is choosing to show us details that connect with Nephi and also connect with the temple. And by the way, First Nephi 2:16, how does Nephi characterize the mysteries experiences? I cried unto the Lord, and then the Lord visited me. I entered into the presence of the Lord. What do we get here? Verse 35, and it came to pass the brother of Jared did cry unto the Lord. Verse 36, then Jared said, well, cry again unto the Lord. And he cried again unto the Lord. And then verse 38, the brother Jared says to his brother, go and inquire of the Lord and cry unto him. And verse 39, the brother of Jared did cry unto the Lord. So we have, again, matching First Nephi 2, matching the experience of Nephi. The brother of Jared's large, he's favored, and he cries unto the Lord. Okay? And I think if we are sensitive to what what the small plates are telling us about Nephi, by the time we got this far, we already know, man, this is this is temple stuff. We are going to temple land here. Okay? By the way, crying 3 times is interesting. Again, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, the entry into the straight and narrow gate follows making a triple petition. You ask, you seek, and you knock, and then you enter into the straight and narrow gate. I forget the verses, maybe it's 11 and 12 or something, Matthew 7. Well, we get here a triple petition. The brother of Jared cries 3 times unto the Lord, right? So again, there's this subtle matchup with temple things we can know from the Nephites that tell us that this Jaredite story is being told with little temple images here and there. That this is gonna be a story that takes us to the temple.
I did a little bit of a search on the phrase calling upon the name,
Oh, interesting.
or even call upon the name.
No, I don't. Okay, so go ahead.
This word cry kind of seems like it's very similar to that, what I've
Yep.
learned about that term, call upon the name, which I believe very much ties back to the endowment.
It does sound very similar, doesn't it? Crying unto the Lord. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So in chapter 1, a couple other interesting points. Let me just point out one. The Nephites, Nephi is obsessed with seed, both in actual seeds of plants, which they a couple of times talk about how we're bringing seeds with us When we're going out in the wilderness or when we go to cross the ocean, we brought seeds of every kind. Okay. And also with the image of seed, meaning descendants. So if you go look in the vision of Nephi, 1 Nephi 11 to 14, you repeatedly get the discussion about his seed. Okay. The brother, well, Moroni, really, Moroni shaping his account out of Ether's record, does the same thing here at the end of chapter 1. The seed of the earth of every kind, verse 41, and then thy seed and the seed of thy brother in verse 43, right? So there's this, and again, without having a big long discussion about it, there's this interesting little connection into things like the tree of life. Okay.
So would you say, I did a podcast a few weeks ago where we talked about the like 4 different layers of Hebrew prophecy,
Oh, interesting.
where they talk about that they
Like Peshat and Remez and
is
that
like
kind
the
of stuff.
plain level, and then
Yeah.
Mez, and then the deepest level is Sod, which is mysteries and temples
Yeah.
that Moroni is actually speaking like a Hebrew prophet
It,
and using these layers of prophecy as he's writing this.
well, 100%. I mean, I think, for example, when he talks about the brother of Jared being a large and mighty man and highly favored, I think that is a Remez technique or a Remez-like technique where you're saying you are supposed to go, aha, Nephi, and you're supposed to incorporate understandings about Nephi and maybe specific passages into your reading here, right? And similarly, the tower, maybe you're supposed to go to, now we don't actually know. There's a lot of reason to think that the brass plates are not the same thing as the Old Testament, right? But you're supposed to go to whatever account of the Tower of Babel Moroni had, right? Whether it was Genesis 11 or something different. And it's interesting that he doesn't say Tower of Babel, right? He just says the tower. Like that's another little piece of suggestion that maybe his version is not the same as Genesis 11, but maybe you're supposed to incorporate that by reference. And by the way, that implies that that you and I, with more time, could sit here and look up the Tower of Babel discussion and read it and think about other ways in which that connects with this story, right? Like we have gone and looked at the Nephi story. And we're already like an hour in now, I think, Randy, right? So, and we just got to chapter 2.
Thank you for being with us on the Spiritual Survival Podcast. Again, if the mission of our podcast resonates with you, please click subscribe, like, and share this content.